There we go. And just as a matter of order here, if you have any questions, you can enter them into the Q&A section or into the chat section. We will have time at the end for questions for our panelists. So just enter those questions there and we'll get to you as soon as we're done. This should be about an hour-long webinar, and we're going to have a few people speaking. So let me get into those. So our speakers tonight, hi, I'm Kimmy Wall. I'm the Public Information Officer and I'm with Rancho Water. I'll be the moderator for tonight and passing it over to these other gentlemen. We've got Kyle Jeffries with us. He's also with Rancho Water, our conservation and water budget analyst. And then we have Gabriel Michael. He's the owner of Blue Watchdog Conservation and will be telling us all about our sprinkler systems and irrigation. And then we also have Sam Brogadir with us. He's from Riverside County Flood. And he's going to be talking about water, waste runoff, and stormwater. So our agenda tonight, kind of went over, we're going to go with Kyle first. He'll be talking about some available rebates for you. With Riverside County Flood, he'll have the impacts of water waste with Sam Brogadir. And with Gabriel Michael, we'll have Blue Watchdog sprucing up your sprinkler system. So first of all, we are proud EPA WaterSense partners. And what that means is WaterSense is a voluntary partnership program sponsored by the EPA, which is the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. They are the agency that's you're going to see the labels on water efficient products, similar to the one that you see to the right where it says look for WaterSense. They're also a resource for helping you save water. So on their website, they have a multitude of programs and products that you can use and buy for your homes, indoor and outdoor, including shower heads and toilets, sprinkler systems, and irrigation equipment. So when you're at Home Depot, Lowe's, any of the hardware stores, it's easy to find these products because you can look for this look for WaterSense label on there. And you'll know that that is a product that meets the EPA's criteria for efficiency and performance. Those are certified to use at least 20% less water, save energy, and perform as well or better than regular models. And one of their programs, which is what we're doing tonight, is the Sprinkler Spruce Up. So what you're going to be doing is inspecting, connecting, directing, and selecting. And that is to help promote healthy landscapes and reduce water waste. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Kyle Jeffries, and he will tell you all about our available rebates.
Thank you, Kimmy, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Before jumping into the actual workshop, we just wanted to quickly highlight some of the most popular tools and resources that we offer you as a Rancho Water customer, obviously in order to keep you, help you save water and keep your water bill as low as possible. So jumping right into it, as you know, we do offer a variety of free workshops throughout the year. Some upcoming workshops that you may be interested in include how to design a water efficient garden. We also have one on weed and pest management. And then lastly, another one on drip irrigation fundamentals. So if you're considering replacing your sprinkler heads and retrofitting your system over to drip, that's going to be a great workshop for you to join. So if this is something you're interested in, please visit ranchowater.com/workshops to see the full list of the upcoming virtual classes. The district also provides technical assistance. One of the most probably popular programs we have is our free irrigation evaluation, where we actually send an irrigation specialist directly to your home to examine your irrigation system and provide feedback. So they'll go there, they'll walk your property, and then they'll actually provide you with a customized report on things that you should upgrade your system to make it as efficient as possible. This is absolutely free for you as a Rancho Water customer, so definitely take advantage of that. And you can sign up today by visiting ranchowater.com/WUE. And then lastly, the district offers a wide array of indoor and outdoor rebates. For the sake of time, I'm not going to be able to list all of them today, but the most popular ones we see are the smart irrigation controllers. So if you have an old, outdated timer that irrigates your landscape while it's raining, you're going to want to pick up a new smart irrigation, a weather-based irrigation controller that irrigates your landscapes based on weather and plant type and soil type. So if you want to take part in those rebates, visit ranchowater.com/rebates. Next slide, please, Kimmy. All right, and then my last slide here, we just were really happy and excited to announce that we recently launched a new dedicated landscape webpage called Temecula Marietta in Bloom, where you as the customer can browse through hundreds and hundreds of climate appropriate plants that thrive here locally in Temecula and Marietta. While browsing different plants, if you come across one that you like, you could save it as your plant preferences. And then when you're finished with your experience, you could actually print out a customized report that summarizes each plant and its water needs. The site also has a list of local nurseries, designers, and contractors that can help assist with your landscape transformation. So we definitely encourage you all to visit ranchoinbloom.com to start designing your own water efficient garden. So with that said, let's kick off this webinar. I'm going to send it over to Sam from Riverside County Flood, and he's going to discuss the impacts on water waste.
Perfect. Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you, Kyle, and good evening, everyone. If you just give me 1 second here, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Perfect. Okay, so as they mentioned, my name is Sam Brogadir. I'm an associate flood control planner with Riverside County Flood Control and Water Conservation District. And I'm here tonight to talk to you about some of the impacts that water waste and water pollution has in our watershed, which is the Santa Margarita River watershed. So just a little bit of background about who we are, the Riverside County Flood Control and Water Conservation District, and where we operate. So as mentioned, we primarily focus in the Santa Margarita River watershed management area. As you can see on the map here, that includes the lower portion of the watershed in green, the middle portion of the watershed in yellow, and then the upper portion in blue. Our primary focus, however, is in that middle section in yellow, which includes the cities of Wildemore, Murrieta, Temecula, and the unincorporated county of Riverside. And so the district, Riverside County Flood Control and Water Conservation District, is the principal permittee in the watershed. And so we help ensure regulatory compliance. And we also have facilities littered throughout the watershed to help control storms and stormwater. So some of the impacts directly related to our watershed are eutrophication and nutrient loading. So I know those may be big words to some people, but the really crux of the problem that we have in our watershed is that we have an abundance of nutrients. And so when you have an abundance of nutrients, typically nitrogen and phosphorus, that can lead to eutrophic conditions, which is an excessive amount of nutrients in lakes or other bodies of water. And so a lot of these nutrients are from residential sources in the watershed. And that is really because water that is released into the streets, gutters, and storm drains is not treated before it reaches our local creeks, rivers, and lakes. So anything that you see flowing down the streets into those catch basins on the gutters, that's not treated water. It is going to pick up all of the pollutants that are in the street and carry that down to our facilities. And so nutrient loading, as mentioned, can lead to these eutrophic conditions, which can result in harmful algal blooms, dead zones, and fish kill. So a bunch of environmental consequences that we would hope to avoid. And it's actually estimated that about 65% of estuaries and coastal waters in the US are moderately to severely degraded by excessive nutrient inputs. And so this problem is pervasive. It's not just in the Santa Margarita River watershed, but it is around the country. And so what does that actually look like in our backyard? And so the photo that you're going to see on your screen here is from a site that we call the Gorge. If you look on the right-hand side here, there's a little pin marking where this is. And so this is the confluence of Murrieta Creek and Temecula Creek as it goes into the Santa Margarita River. And this is running parallel to the 15 and is just a little bit further south from the 15 and the 215 merge. And so what you're seeing in the photo here on the left is a harmful algal bloom. And so due to an excess amount of nutrients in our watershed, we have these massive algal blooms, which can absorb all of the dissolved oxygen, making it impossible for wildlife to live there. And also it's an eyesore. It can attract mosquitoes, flies, and other nuisance creatures. So it's something that we definitely want to avoid. So this is an example, again, in our backyard of eutrophication and something that we are trying to actively avoid. The other thing besides nutrient loading is there is a ton of just trash and pollution that gets washed down to our facilities. And so as mentioned, we have outfalls in the region. Those are basically where all of the water that flows through the street outlets. And so we have these facilities littered throughout the county. And as I mentioned, stormwater is not treated. So any debris or trash that's in the street is going to get carried by those storm flows into our facility. And as you can see here on the right, this is an unfortunate picture of one of our sites in Temecula. So there's, clothes, there's diapers, there's any piece of trash, there's needles. And so it's a big problem that we have. And, some of this waste can also be hazardous. As mentioned, we have needles come down or human feces. And so it's a huge problem that we are trying to actively avoid by educating residents, businesses, to make sure that they're not dumping any of their waste and that they're disposing it properly. Additionally, these flows that are coming down, if they are not from rain events, and even if they are, but mainly discharges from residential sources. So if someone has a broken sprinkler that's causing an excess amount of water to run off their property, if that goes into our facility, over time, that can actually damage the health of our sites. Water is an immensely powerful force, and over time, it can erode away different soils and actually the concrete from our facility, damaging their ability to actually carry storm flows, which can potentially lead to flooding as well. So it's really a problem that we see damage at our outfalls from these persistent flows from residential sources, and as well as our outfalls littered with trash that's picked up as those storm flows go down from neighborhoods. Some other interesting things to consider is the habitat, right? We are not the only ones relying on the waterways. There's a diverse ecosystem that relies on the water in the Santa Margarita region. And so the Santa Margarita River watershed is actually a critical habitat for a number of endangered species. One of the most famous ones is pictured here on the right. This is the anadromous steelhead trout, also known as the rainbow head trout. And so this is a really neat fish. For years, actually decades, we didn't see them in the Santa Margarita River watershed. And that was because extensive development ruined their habitat. But with conservation implementation, we've able to restore their habitats, and we're actually starting to see a bloom in their counts. And so that's something that's really cool. And the watershed is also home to about 70 other federally and state listed endangered species. So it's really important that we are taking care of the watershed, not only for our health, but for the health of the species that rely on it. Another really cool thing about our watershed is that it is actually the longest free-flowing river in the Southern California coast. And so that's really neat. It's 27 miles in length of undisturbed river, and that's why it is such an amazing habitat for these 70 plus endangered species. And one of the other things I really wanted to leave everyone with is that we have had a really fortunate year. As you all know, we have just been inundated with rain, which is awesome. The cliche thing is that we need it, but what we have seen is that the amount of water has actually placated a lot of people, and they think that they can go back to their old watering habits, just with a hose, overwatering. And I really want to remind everyone that the climate is cyclical and that we will have droughts in the future, right? And so we need to continue to conserve and to reduce water waste for the health of future generations and for the diverse ecosystem that is supported by it. And so with that, just take a moment to pause to see if there's any questions. If not, really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you again, and I will hand things over to Gabriel. Thanks.
Thank you, Sam. Good evening, everybody. I am going to, if I can, there we go. I'm going to be the one that talks about the sprinkler spruce up. So let me get this going. Okay, so sprinkler spruce up is something that it's a good practice for homeowners if you have a portfolio of properties. If you have irrigation systems or one irrigation system at your house, it's a good practice to get in the habit of doing annually. A spruce up is something that you will conduct at the beginning of the irrigation season. And we're all pretty used to how we have, rain in the winter, or as Sam said, some winters are better than others, but typically we'll have part of the year that we get our natural rainfall, and then we start to supplement that with irrigation around this time of year. So this is a good time of year to test your sprinklers out, look at them and see how they're operating, because now you're going to be operating them more frequently, longer run times, And so if you have leaks, breaks, overspray, all the things we're going to talk about, all of that is going to equal a lot more water waste. So a spruce up is a really important thing to consider for your sprinkler system. Here you can see Kimmy mentioned that we're going to cover 4 main categories, which is inspecting, looking at connections, selecting different types of equipment, and then directing spray onto landscape and not pavement, because as Sam just mentioned, the importance of making sure that we don't provide any or produce any runoff into our storm drains. So starting with an inspection, if you've never looked at your sprinkler systems in the kind of lens of I'm inspecting it and trying to find out what's wrong with it, hopefully this will help you to understand what some of the deficiencies are that we're looking for, so that even if we're not going to be the ones repairing it, we can take a note or flag it and have someone come out and repair it for us. But an inspection is going to cover basically turning on your sprinkler system, looking at it, and then flagging or marking where there's a problem, and then coming back later and fixing it. So systematically going through your property, if you have 6 or 7 different irrigation zones, when you go to your controller in the garage or however you operate your sprinkler system, you should have a set amount of different valves that will turn on. And so we want to run through every valve on the property. We want to watch it, look at it, find out if there's something wrong. And if there's something wrong, put a marker, or you can get these lawn flags that you see in this picture here. You can buy those at any home supply store. You can flag it. It's also, if you want to carry like a Sharpie or something, you can write down, hey, this sprinkler is broken, or there's whatever the issue is, so that when you come back later to fix it, or if you hire a contractor to come out and fix it, there's a lot less lost in translation, and you don't have to turn the system on again if you've already made a note right there in that physical location where you saw an issue. So the first thing that we're going to look for in an inspection is a pretty simple thing. To anyone, you don't need a degree in irrigation science to kind of identify above ground leaks. Above ground leaks are something that you will see geysers, you'll see puddles, and that sort of thing can point you in the direction of there's an issue there. When the system's running, as you can see in this picture here, it's not really clear exactly what might be wrong. And so if you do want to get your hands dirty and get down in there and see what's going on, you'll typically have to excavate that area a little bit. If that's a actual sprinkler body, or if that's a pipe or whatever's broken, you'll need to expose it and see what's going on. But leaks can occur anywhere in your system. All of it has the potential to, fittings will have a joint or a weld that won't hold, forever, and eventually will develop a pinhole leak. Around the sprinkler bodies themselves, they'll have issues with seals and that sort of thing, valves. So anywhere you see something like this is obviously a bad thing. And so in our inspection, we're going to, again, turn on every single zone one by one. And if we see leaks, we can flag it. And if you don't want to get fancy flags, you can mark it with, rocks or whatever, however you want to determine where you're going to mark it. But systematically, again, it's best to go through all your zones, turn them all on, and then make marks where there's an issue. So first thing we're looking for is leaks. We also want to, in our inspection, look at irrigation scheduling. So plant water needs change with the season, and as well your schedule should too. So irrigation scheduling is something that, this is a picture right here of an irrigation controller. It's good to identify where your irrigation controller is at your house if you don't know. Typically they're in the garage or right on the exterior, near where the water goes into your house. That's a location that you'll typically see these irrigation controllers. But it's good to go through and audit that controller and make sure that it's running the way it's intended to run. And then also just go through, and this is where you can run zone by zone to see if there's an issue. So typical controllers will have maybe 2 zones at the least, all the way up to maybe 16 for larger properties. If you're on a giant property, out in wine country or up in the hills somewhere, you might have multiple controllers. You might also have what we call battery operated controllers. So it's not this typical, what you would see these conventional boxes that are wired in or plugged in somewhere. They might be out with the valves. They look like little hockey pucks, or these little devices that will clip onto the valves. It's good to know where all your controllers are, go and look at them, and adjust the scheduling if needed, depending on what time of year you're in. There's more resources for scheduling all that online that you can get base schedules. And then we'll talk a little bit about smart controllers, which are a lot easier to operate. Another issue that we're looking for during our irrigation inspection is misting. And this is something that maybe you haven't seen it on your property, but you've probably seen the typical irrigation zone turn on. It's a planter or a lawn in a shopping center, and it just looks like this giant cloud of mist. Well, that's not a normal thing. If you see this, this is an indication that your system's running at higher than optimal pressure. And the issue with high pressure is there's a few things. One is when you run valves and nozzles and all types of irrigation equipment at higher pressure than what's optimal, it has a lower life expectancy, meaning you will get nozzles that break, you will get valves that break a lot faster than, you know, the 10-year warranty that's on it. So high pressure is something good to identify. And if you have an issue with pressure, that's when you need to implement or install what we call pressure regulators. Pressure regulators can be installed on your main line, they can be installed on valves, they can be installed on each individual sprinkler. And it's something that will help, again, improve the longevity of the system, but also improve the performance. So when you run at high pressure, this picture here, you can see this misting cloud. We actually run that system at a higher flow. So this zone at high pressure will run at more gallons per minute, meaning your property is going to use more gallons per night, but you lose that water in the action of atomization and it wafting away onto your neighbor's lawn or the street or wherever it goes. But we pump more water through our meter and through our valve and through the sprinklers, but less of it actually lands on the landscape. If you bring your pressure down to the optimal range, then we have lower flow rates or less gallons per minute or less gallons per night. And that's going to equal, in some cases, more precipitation onto the landscaped area, which means you can sometimes run your system less amount of time and be using less gallons per minute. So high pressure is something that is really common to see in a, residential and commercial landscapes. But for those folks, homeowners that are going to be inspecting their systems during this spruce up, this is something to identify, high pressure. You can go to the next step and go to a home supply store and get a pressure gauge and test the pressure and all that. But a lot of times it's pretty obvious when you just see misting. Misting is not a normal thing out of sprinklers. If you see it, then it's an indication that you have high pressure. Next, we're going to talk about sprinklers aimed incorrectly. So sprinklers aimed incorrectly onto hardscape is not a good thing. And Sam mentioned all of kind of the bad things involved in urban runoff. And it, not always, but a lot of times we'll start with just misaligned sprinklers. So the picture you see here is, a lawn and a median or wherever it is. But the sprinklers are misaligned and they're shooting outside of the target area. So if you're doing your inspection and you see something like this, there's a couple of things you can do to fix it. One is if you have adjustable nozzles, you can adjust them. So you can take the arc from 180 degrees down to 110 degrees or whatever the appropriate arc is to not have overspray onto the hardscape. Something that also is pretty common is that your misalignment is just the pop-up stem. So let me move my zoom window so I can point. So if you see the stem here, you can actually rotate that. And so if that is moved the wrong way, you can actually grab that and turn the spray pattern to where you want to direct it. And that's really important because over time, if it gets kicked or ran over by a lawnmower, there's lots of things that can change the alignment of a sprinkler just over, its normal operation. So if you see something like this, you see overspray, you want to check to see if it's just a matter of adjusting that nozzle, if it's an adjustable nozzle, or you just need to readjust the stem. In some cases, you may just have the wrong type of nozzle. So an example would be here, this sprinkler should probably be maybe like 180 degrees, covering a semicircle. But in this case, maybe it's shooting 270 degrees. It's the wrong type of nozzle. In that case, you can go and purchase the right arc size nozzle. So you can, when you're getting nozzles, or when you go to a home supply store and you look for, look through all the different sprinkler nozzles they have, you can pick out one that is either adjustable, so you can adjust it to whatever arc you want, or you can pick out one that is appropriate. Typical fixed nozzles will come in 90 degrees, 180 degrees, and 360 degrees. So in a lot of cases, it's better to have what's called variable arc nozzles so that you can adjust them. They cost essentially the same price, but it's a lot better in terms of avoiding overspray onto hardscape, because all of this, again, just like we talked about with high pressure, you have a higher flow, you have a higher gallon per minute, gallon per night. When you trim down your arc and you only direct water onto the landscape instead of shooting over, you actually reduce the flow of that zone and you get, more benefit out of it. So we want to, as best possible when we're doing our inspection, identify places where we have overspray onto hardscape, so that we can limit the amount of runoff that we have. We want to look during our inspection for places of poor sprinkler coverage. So this is an example of something that is not super easy to identify sometimes. So with sprinklers, we want to make sure that we have what's called head-to-head coverage, meaning you turn your system on, all the sprinklers pop up. You want one sprinkler to go and touch the next one. You want the water from one sprinkler to go and touch the next one. So if you have a lack in coverage, you see this, we call these localized dry spots that pop up in the middle of summer. And so this might be something during your spruce up inspection that you're looking around the landscape and you're trying to identify if you have poor coverage. It's kind of hard. I mean, you can put your hand over a sprinkler and look for, incoming water, and you can go sprinkler by sprinkler, but in some cases, it's hard to tell if you have poor coverage. Sometimes it's just identified by the stress that you will see later in the season. So sometime in, maybe soon, it's getting hot. So May, the end of May, beginning of June, you might start to see these stressed out areas. So you need to make sure that if you see stressed out areas, what is causing that? If it's the poor coverage, if it's just this localized dry spot like we see here, a typical response to that is that, well, my lawn needs to run longer. And so, homeowners will go and say, hey, I got this dry spot on my lawn, so obviously I'm not giving my lawn enough water. And they'll put, 5, 10, whatever more minutes on the clock. But you can see there's parts of the lawn that are performing perfectly fine. So the correct action to take here is to look at the nozzles adjacent to these dry spots and say, are they shooting as far as they should? Are they covering as much as they should? And then that can help you kind of narrow down if you have poor coverage. But if you ever see dry spots, if your whole lawn starts dying, uniformly or somewhat uniformly, yes, that's an indication that you're in a deficit and you need to irrigate longer. But if you see just a dry spot that creeps up, like I said, the end of May, beginning of June, and you see something like this, it's not an indication that you're not putting down enough water. It's just that the water is not spreading out as evenly as it should be. And the best action to take would be to look at different nozzles to make sure that you have proper coverage. We also want to try to avoid significant overwatering. Now, if you're doing a spruce up and you're doing an inspection, this is something that's going to be, it's easy in some sense if you have a more sloped area, but you want to make sure that you're avoiding runoff off of your landscape. So if you're overwatering, if you're putting water down too quickly, a lot of cases we're putting water down at rates about 2 inches per hour. If you could think of that in sense of what a typical rain event is, we might get 1/4 of an inch in a rain event. We're putting about 2 inches of rain in an hour. It's going in really quickly, a lot quicker than our infiltration rates for our soil. And so it builds up on the surface and it starts to literally just exit, we call it overland flow, and it starts to move towards hardscape, storm drains off the property. And this picture kind of shows that water just leaving the landscape. So we want to avoid that by making sure that we don't exceed our maximum run times. Now, the best thing you can do here is that if you have, let's say, for instance, a 5-minute runtime on your front lawn, what you can do is you can run that for 5 minutes and you can see if water starts to run off of it. You can even take it to the next step. You can run the front lawn and you can have a stopwatch and wait till you see water start to come off of that area and say, okay, I saw water start to roll out of the lawn onto the sidewalk at 6 minutes, 7 minutes. Might be less than, it'll probably be less than that if it's more sloped. It might be 3 minutes. And then you could say, I don't want to run my system more than 3 minutes or more than 4 minutes. Because it's really common that you'll see people will have sloped areas, sloped lawns, and they'll say, hey, it's really hard to grow stuff on this area. So I've been adding more and more runtime to it. But if you have a max runtime of 3 minutes, 4 minutes, whatever it is, if you add more time onto it, you're just going to equal more runoff. And so we want to avoid that. And we want to try our best to, during our inspection, identify what our max runtimes are. So this is runtimes are too long or frequent, or if you irrigate after it rains, it can result in runoff. And this is actually a picture where you can see the runoff is going pretty much directly into this little storm drain right here. And that's what we're trying to avoid, that, all the dissolved fertilizers and stuff that's in there that we're now transporting out to the Santa Margarita. So try to avoid runoff by identifying max run times. Inspections. So if you find broken heads, place a flag next to it. It doesn't have to be a flag, but these flags are relatively inexpensive. You can buy a pack of them from a home supply store. They're really easy if you're doing any yard work, not just for sprinklers, to mark where you're going to plant something or whatever. But if you want to put a flag next to it, so that way you can come back and fix it later. The best way to go through it during your spruce up and identify things wrong is to systematically go through the whole system, inspect it, flag everything, and then come back and fix it later. So you may be able to fix a lot of this stuff yourself. YouTube is a great resource. A lot of irrigation sprinkler hardware stuff is relatively simple to figure out. It's PVC, so it goes together pretty well. But if you're unsure, you could always hire a professional. And professionals can be found at this resource here. This is an EPA resource. Look for watersense.epa.gov/pros. You could literally just Google pros and WaterSense label, and you'll find it. It's a database where you can buy zip code. So if you're in Temecula or Marietta, you could say, hey, I'm looking for a licensed contractor that does residential, all the filters and everything. So you'd say residential irrigation, go, and it will produce a list of names in the area that are WaterSense labeled. And so just so you know, an irrigation professional that's on an EPA website is not only someone who is a contractor that does irrigation, they also have one or more WaterSense labeled certifications. So they might be something with the Irrigation Association, certified landscape technician, or a qualified water efficient landscaper. So they have a good amount of training to be water efficient and all that. If they're on this website, look for watersense.epa.gov/pros. So that was our inspection as far as just a general walkthrough, looking for different things that we can identify that are wrong and that we want to fix. So this portion is about connections, and the connections, we talked about leaks can occur anywhere, but where you're going to find leaks more often than not is places where there are connections, because a solid run, let's say you have a 100-foot run of PVC pipe. In that run, and you can spring a leak in there, but you'll most likely find that the leak is going to be at the fitting or at the connection of that pipe to another pipe or a valve. So these three things, sprinklers, pipes, and valves, these connections are the places where you're most commonly going to see issues. So starting with the sprinklers, if you see puddles around the actual sprinklers, it's not 100% guarantee, but you could be really confident that there's probably something wrong with the seal, the gasket near the top of the head of that device. Underneath all your sprinklers, there's a series of different attachments. So if it's on a swing joint, there's going to be a couple of 90 or elbow attachments. It's going to be threaded into a PVC pipe. So there's a lot of connections there. And there's also, with the seals and everything, and there's the pop-up action, there's a moving part. So anytime you see something that has moving parts and connections, you're most suspicious of it. So in this picture you see here, this is just, a sprinkler that's popped up water in a lawn, and it's in this giant puddle. Now, I wouldn't say, hey, 100% there's something wrong with that sprinkler, But if you're trying to identify where that puddle's coming from, your best bet is to dig down, look at that sprinkler. You can even, once you excavate the area around this sprinkler, you can let it dry out or pump it out or take buckets and get that water out of there. You can turn the system back on and then look at all the stuff underneath and watch to see where the water comes from. And a lot of times it will just be a fitting that is, worn, or the Teflon tape is worn out, or something is wrong with the fittings underneath. Other places where you'll see connections are pipes. And this is an example of a typical point of connection to a residential property. So you might have something similar to this. It may not be exactly this configuration, but it should be something similar to this. So this right here is the water coming from the street. It's going up through a pressure regulator and then going up into the house. And then you could see here, the water splits off and goes back down into the ground. That's going to the landscape. We know that it's going to be exterior landscape water when it switches over from copper, this bright copper pipe, to white PVC pipe. So the PVC, all that stuff plumbed out in PVC is going to be for the irrigation system. This is a good place to check for leaks themselves. So there's a lot of connections here. You could see there's fittings, there's devices, there's shutoff valves. All this stuff put together could, over time, have a leak. Now, if you see, this is all nice and shiny. If you go out to where you shut the water off to your house, and if you don't know where this is also another good thing, a good thing to go and check where you shut the water off to your house, because if something breaks inside, it's good to know how to shut the water off to the inside, and also if something breaks outside, how to shut the water off to just the outside, because if my sprinklers are broken or if I have a valve that breaks, I don't want to lose water to the whole property. Here I could just isolate and turn off the sprinklers with this valve and continue my indoor life as normal. But you want to find where your point of connection is or where the water comes into your house. A visual inspection of this is usually all that's needed to see if there's a leak occurring directly at this location. A lot of times you will see stuff like algae growing on the side of it. If it goes long, if you have a leak long enough, it will be like, rather than a bright copper color, it'll be more patinaed and it will have literally green slime on it. And that's something that's common for pipes, valves, anything. You see that kind of buildup of algae, then you might think, okay, there's constant water supply here. And where is it coming from? So all of these little joints, there's possible locations for leaks. This, your pipes here, your connection here is also a good place to isolate if you have constant movement on your meter, or if you get, one of those leak alerts from Rancho, California saying, hey, you're using water every hour of every day, and we think you might have a leak. This is a place where you can go and isolate it. So you can turn off the house and, check your meter to see if there's still water moving. If there is, then it's outside or it's in the supply line. You can do the same thing. You can isolate, you can turn off different parts of the property if you have constant movement or a continuous leak, to isolate and see where it is. And again, knowing where this is a good thing, because then if you do have a problem outdoors, you can just shut off the outdoors and go back to, finishing the evening and waiting till a contractor comes, or you decide you're going to go out and repair it, or whenever that's going to happen. Doesn't have to happen right away. Valves on the outdoors are also the third one. So we had, valves are something where we have a lot of connections. They are the connection from your main line. So your main line is always a pressurized pipe. So you can see here in this picture, this is a pressurized pipe coming up here and going across. It's pressurized up to each one of these green devices. And then these turn on and off, and they open and close and let water go down to each irrigation zone. So a lot of moving parts inside of one of these valves, a lot of connections. There's the connection of the valve itself to the inlet side and the output side. There's also the solenoid that's screwed on top. So the connections there, and then the diaphragm inside, which moves quite a bit, every time it turns on every night or every other night, or however often it turns on. That diaphragm is going to be moving a lot with constant water pressure on it. So these are something to check to make sure that they're not leaking. Same thing with your point of connection to your house. If you see something like bright green algae, that's an indication that there's water seeping out of one of the connections here. So you want to make sure everything is tight on top of these valves too. So the solenoids, these little black cylinders that are going to be on top of your irrigation valves, you want to make sure that these are, you don't want to over tighten anything, but you do want to make sure that you are firmly making sure they're secured. So everything is shut, because if you have a loose solenoid on top, you might be just pushing a little bit of water through that valve out to the sprinklers, and it's coming out somewhere downstream somewhere, maybe in a bush that no one will ever see. So you want to make sure everything's tight here. Make sure you visually inspect these valves to make sure that they're not leaking. And if you see anything wrong, obviously flag it, and come back and either hire a professional or whatever your plan is to repair the valve. So now we get into the category of direction, or directing sprinklers so that they are performing properly. And we talked a little bit about coverage, and I talked about head-to-head coverage. And that's an important thing about the directing of your sprinklers. So you want to make sure that you have head-to-head coverage. This is a picture where you can kind of get an idea of what the spacing is here. Now, this is something that will be helpful for you to understand at home if you're doing, again, going back to the inspection. We talked a little bit about coverage. If you're trying to identify if you have head-to-head coverage, meaning this sprinkler goes and maybe this is a bad example, but this sprinkler would go and spray its water far enough to touch the next sprinkler. I think the next sprinkler is actually this way, but either way, you want to make sure that these sprinklers go and pretty much complement the next head over. And so the way you could do that is you can just find out the distance between these two. You can take a measuring tape, you can pace it. If generally, when you take a step, is it 3 feet? Take 3 steps. Okay, that's a 9-foot spacing. Whatever the case may be, you figure out what the distance between the two heads are. Then you can find out how far your sprinkler nozzles go. A lot of nozzles will actually have on the top of them, a number stamped into them, 9 feet, 10 feet, 12 feet, whatever it is. That will give you an idea of how far it can actually reach. And so if you have, let's call this, I don't know what this is, but let's call it a 15-foot spacing, but I only have a 10-foot nozzle on there. Well, then I don't have head-to-head coverage, and there's going to be an issue with performance, meaning I'm stretching the water out a little bit too much here. And this is an area that I would expect to see a performance issue in, that localized dry spot we identified earlier. So I would expect to see some issues here in the summer. And if I do, and again, I do that test, let's say we do that test a month or two from now, once we have that localized dry spot, now we're going to say, okay, now I'm going to put a larger nozzle on there so that I can get better coverage. In a lot of cases, these spray nozzles aren't very effective past 12 feet or so. So if you have this style of nozzle, this spray nozzle, it's going to be difficult if your spacing is over 12 feet. Some of them might be effective up to 15, but a lot of times just with wind and how fine the water droplets are, it can be difficult at spacings over 12 feet. Then you need to go with a different type of nozzle. But coverage, that is an important one. Overspray also, we are kind of reiterating the importance of making sure that you don't have overspray, because we don't want to see any water on hardscape. Hardscape has no water requirement. Your lawn needs 4 feet of water a year to stay alive. Concrete needs 0. So we don't need to put any water on the sidewalks, walls, anything like that. Sam already talked about once that water goes onto the hardscape and moves towards the rivers, why that's a bad thing. For you personally, just looking at your property in general, this does supplemental damage. Over time, if you have overspray onto fences, walls, stucco, that sort of stuff, over time is going to have an impact on how often you need to resurface it. Everyone thinks, okay, I have the exterior of my house is made out of weatherproof materials and no big deal. But when you put potable water onto stucco, that's not weather. That's a harder water than what falls out of the sky. So you get calcification, and we've probably all seen, the white stains on fences and that sort of thing. So over time, that's going to also reduce the lifespan of certain building materials. So we want to avoid overspray. We don't want to have X amount of gallons per minute going onto concrete or the driveway or wherever and just leaving the property. That's water that you paid for. We don't want it to transport pollutants and stuff to the rivers. That's bad for the environment. We don't want to damage our own property because that's also bad. So overspray is something We talked about different types of nozzles, making sure we have the correct nozzle. So this, and it's kind of hard to tell, but this nozzle looks like it's probably a 360. So it's going 360 degrees. It's shooting every direction when it should in fact be 90 degrees. So if that is, let's call this a fixed nozzle, I would replace that nozzle. So rather than it shooting 360 degrees, I would have it shoot just 90 degrees towards the lawn. If it's an adjustable nozzle, then you can go and actually with your hand, or in some cases, there's tools that come with the nozzles. You can adjust that nozzle so that it only shoots 90 degrees versus 360 degrees all the way around. So next we have selecting WaterSense labeled irrigation components. So we talked about during your inspection, going through and checking your controller and making sure the run times are correct and all that. But honestly, if you look at managing a conventional controller, so in your garage or wherever it is, your irrigation controller, if you program in run times that are good for, let's say, this week, those run times aren't going to be any good a week from now. There's a lot of changes that happen with the plants. So we're going into, we're in a growing season right now. So the water requirements are going to be increased. So there's going to be a certain percent that we need to replenish. The amount of actual water that we need to supply to the landscape is going to be different week by week. So looking at a controller, and again, there's online resources to calculate out run times and all that, and you can explore that. It's a lot easier if you use something called a weather-based irrigation controller. And weather-based irrigation controllers are something that are much more autonomous. They will just adjust stuff for you. So you take out your conventional controller. If you're familiar with like a Ring doorbell or a Nest thermostat, it's a really similar type of installation. And if you've done that before, you might know that you had your conventional doorbell, right? You took the doorbell off, you wired everything up, and then you connect to an app, and now you have a smart doorbell. So it's really similar for these controllers that go for the residential market. You take off your conventional controller, hopefully it's in a garage somewhere that has Wi-Fi. Make sure that you confirm that you have Wi-Fi in the location before you buy it. But once you take the conventional controller off, you hang up your smart controller. It's the same thing. You Bluetooth to the device, you connect your phone to the Wi-Fi, and now you're just operating the whole thing from your phone. If you want to do it on a computer, on a desktop, you can. But for those folks that use apps and stuff, it's really simple. It's got a user interface that is built for homeowners, for people that aren't spending a lot of time researching, water requirements and things like that. So it's all set up so that you can install it yourself. You can select the type of plants you have. You put in where you live, so it gets a baseline of what your microclimate is. You tell it, hey, I've got a lawn. I'm using this type of sprinkler. You tell it it's a lawn, so it knows the water requirement. You tell it what type of sprinkler, so it knows how quickly you're applying water. And then it's just going to do basic algorithms daily to say, here's the weather, here's how quickly you apply water, here's the run times. And it's really cool because if you look at, how, your allotted water throughout the year, you get that kind of more water, you're allotted more water in the summer. Well, your smart controllers are going to adjust up on that same curve. And as you're allotted less water in the fall coming into the winter, your smart controllers are going to adjust your run times down. So you're going to be able to better track your budgets versus, just having a static runtime that is going to put you in a surplus some part of the year, maybe in a deficit another part of the year. These smart controllers, these weather-based irrigation controllers are really handy. And if you get a Wi-Fi model, they are everywhere. I mean, the market's so saturated. You go to like Costco and find these things, but they're everywhere. And if you install one, Jeff mentioned that there's Kyle. I don't know why. Kyle mentioned that there's rebates, right? So you can go and you can get a rebate for your smart controllers. And a lot of times, if you have a smaller controller, the rebates are going to pretty much not entirely cover the cost of it, but be really close to what the cost of these units are. Larger controllers are going to be more, but this is something to look into. Weather-based irrigation controllers and specifically the Wi-Fi ones that are meant for residential properties. They also have soil moisture-based irrigation controllers. This is technology that can be used to detect the amount of moisture in the ground. These are a little more efficient, but they're a lot more expensive and a lot more technical how they're how they're managed. If you have a larger property, again, people that are maybe on estates out in the hills and wine country and all that, this might be something that is useful, especially if you're growing avocados and that sort of thing. If you're on a typical residential property and you have some lawn and some planters, soil moisture-based irrigation controllers are more efficient, but could be a little bit more difficult to manage. So it's really important that we look for this WaterSense label. This is going to tell us that it meets the EPA's criteria. So it's been tested by Smart Water Applied Technologies to say, okay, this type of controller, it works. It's, meets the irrigation adequacy. It meets the irrigation efficiency. And there's a whole bunch of testing, kind of like UL on like plugs and stuff like that. So it's the same type of thing for smart devices. It says this device does what's advertised. It meets criteria that is established by the EPA. So you want to make sure that when you're buying a controller, it has this WaterSense label. But I think it's more important that when you go out and buy a smart controller, you make sure it's on the rebate list. And so the cool thing is that if you get a controller that's on the rebate list, it's kind of been vetted already. So it's been vetted from the water district, from your water provider. And then it's also been vetted by the EPA because the water providers are only giving you rebates for WaterSense EPA criteria devices. So make sure if you want to kind of a list, you can go to where you get your rebates at SoCal WaterSmart, and you can download the list of all the controllers if you want to. And you can see all those devices you get a rebate for them and they're WaterSense labeled. And with that, I think we have about 7 minutes for questions.
That's great. Thank you so much, Gabriel. Okay, so as we said before, if you have questions, go ahead and type that into the Q&A section of your screen. We do have a few questions that had popped up. Gabriel, most of these are for you, so if you'll stay online with us.
Sure.
Where are the best places to buy irrigation equipment? Is it going to be a Home Depot or Lowe's, or are there other places locally, Amazon? What do you suggest?
Depends what type of equipment. If it's stuff like plumbing stuff, pipes, fitting, all that, any home supply store will do just fine. But if you're trying to get smart controllers, same thing. Home supply stores have all of the major brands and all the major ones that are like residential, Rancho, Orbit, all the stuff that you would find that you would need for controllers and piping and all that. It's pretty typical that you'll find that in any home supply store. When it comes to nozzles, we didn't really talk too much about high efficiency nozzles, but high efficiency nozzles could be something that is easier to find at an irrigation supply store. The problem with the irrigation supply store is there's the retail price and there's the wholesale price. So unless you're a contractor, you're going to be paying the retail price. So if you've got a landscaper or a contractor, it's probably best for nozzles to go through your contractor and say, I want you to get X amount of nozzles or do a retrofit or whatever. But everything else, controllers, pipe, all that stuff, I think you shouldn't have any problem going to any generic home supply store.
Perfect. So you kind of mentioned the nozzles. What's the difference between the traditional sprinkler heads and rotating nozzles?
So a traditional sprinkler head is one that you saw in the presentation over and over again. That's called a spray nozzle. It puts water down really quickly and has the tendency to put it down in very fine droplets. And so with that, we have the ability for those droplets to get pushed away. And then we also have the fact that we're putting water down really quickly. It's building up and moving. It's running off or whatever. The high efficiency rotating nozzles, they put water down a lot slower in coarser streams. So those coarser streams are able to cut through wind and the environment and land where they want to land. And the fact that we're putting water down slower means that there's a certain rate at which water is taken into soil. We're kind of matching that rate, not precisely, but we're applying water slower so it can actually soak into the soil versus dumping a bunch of water on. And that's where we talked about max run times, right? So we want to make sure when we put the water on, we'll put it down as slow as possible. So high efficiency rotating nozzles, I think those are the two main benefits. There's a ton more as far as performance and stuff that are more stats driven by manufacturers, but those are the two big ones from a homeowner's perspective.
Okay. Great. What's the reason just for using PVC for irrigation? You mentioned going from copper over to PVC.
What's the reason?
Is there a reason that we use the PVC underground for the irrigation? Does it just hold up better?
It's cheaper.
Cheaper? Great.
Yeah, it's just cheaper. Yeah.
All right. Where at your house would you typically find that point of connection? Is there a typical area people would go find that?
Yeah, so I think the best place to start is if you know where your water meter is, you can kind of stand at the meter, look back towards your house in a straight line. This is not where it's always going to be. That's the first place you start. Next place, if that's not it, if you look at the house, you want to look towards the front of the house, around the exterior. You should find something similar to that. There's a shutoff, a pipe going in. If there's no luck there, next place would be try to back trace from your water heater. So pipes are exposed at the water heater. And if you're in your garage or wherever, a closet or something, a lot of times you can see where that pipe is exiting the exterior of your house. That will kind of point you in the right direction where your point of connection to your house is. But it could be a little difficult. And those should be some common ways that you'll find it.
Perfect. How often should drip hoses and tubing be changed or replaced?
Replacements, drip tubing's got a pretty long lifespan. I would say that depending on how exposed it is to UV light is going to really determine how often it needs to be replaced. If you've got drip tube just kind of out there exposed, it's really going to be a matter of testing it to see how brittle it is, how well it's standing up. Every manufacturer is going to be different. That was a two-part. It was how often do you want to replace it, and what was the second part?
Yes, how often should drip hoses or tubing be changed or replaced?
Oh, it's the same thing, change or replace. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, if replacing is really just going to come down to inspecting it and seeing if it's standing up, because there's not really like, oh, every 5 years you swap out the drip tube. I would say, I don't even want to give it a timeline because it really depends on the environmental factors that it's in. If it's underneath mulch, it could probably last a really long time, but you're gonna have to make the determination just by its performance. If it looks like it's falling apart, then it's probably time to, take it out and putting it down. So, but if it's on the surface, it should be relatively simple to replace.
Somebody mentioned, maybe rhetorically, that every time they put their sprinklers, they rotate them back. It goes right back to the wrong alignment immediately after you fix it. So that kind of brings up the point, how often should we be doing these sprinkler spruce ups just to go check everything?
Spruce up is recommended at the beginning of the irrigation season. So that's going to be an annual thing. So you could think that, when we get towards October, wherever the rain starts picking up, a lot of us are going to turn our systems off. They're going to kind of lay dormant for the winter. And then it's when we fire them back on. So when we have to start putting water back onto our landscape, before it gets running, right? So I mentioned that in the spring right now, you're probably working up to maybe 2-3 times a week. In the summer, you might be going 5 to 7 days a week. And then, so if you didn't catch something at the beginning of that season, it can equal a lot of water waste. So a spruce up is just something that would be done annually. Now, the more often you do it, the better. But at a minimum, larger properties, it's going to be difficult. But at a minimum, I would say annually.
Perfect. And you kind of mentioned the WIVIC systems, the weather-based irrigation, but is that the best way if you have a garden that has grass and then it also has California-friendly plants that are going to require different water use? Is that the best way to have one sprinkler system that kind of takes care of everything?
Meaning a weather-based irrigation controller, controlling different hydro zones? Yeah, sure. So if you've got different water requirement plants, if you've got a lawn, California natives, non-natives, if you have a whole bunch of different stuff, as long as they're on different irrigation zones, the smart controller is going to be the way to go. If it's something where you have something that you really don't want to work off of the weather model, you can just run everything else on a smart watering schedule. And let's say you don't want to water your drought tolerance in the summer because it's maybe desertscape or whatever the reason is, you can just turn that zone off. You don't have to just send it along with all the other stuff. So if you've got a multiple different types of water requirements in your landscape, it's still going to be something that is going to benefit the majority of the landscape usually.
Perfect. And then you mentioned, as we're coming to the end here, if you can go over one more time, if people want to find local contractors, where do you recommend that they go to do that?
So let me go back to, because I don't have it memorized. So this is the EPA's resource. So this is just a database that you go in, you put your zip code, you kind of click in some filter information about, I'm looking for irrigation or whatever the case may be. Residential, I think, is another filter, residential, commercial. But it's look for watersense.epa.gov/pros. You could just go to the epa.gov website and kind of navigate to it either way. But this is a good resource. I think last time I checked, in the Temecula Valley area, there's probably about 30 to 40 professionals that are listed on this database. So it's a good list of people to look through and get an idea of if you need someone to come out and replace a valve or help you with some water efficiency upgrade. Is a good place to start, because like I mentioned, they're not just normal contractors, they're contractors that have one or more EPA WaterSense labeled certification.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you very much, Gabriel. Thank you also to Sam and to Kyle for joining us tonight. As a reminder, this has been recorded, so we are going to be sharing this video on our YouTube and on our ranchowater.com website. If you want to watch it again, if you want to share it with friends or family or your neighbors, you think they might need some help in this area, do that. And then you all have my email address, but once again, it's publicinfo@ranchowater.com. If you have more questions that come up, you can send us an email and we will get back to you. Thank you again so much for joining us tonight, and we hope you have a good evening. Bye.